as if I'd been dropped into the middle of the jungle. And that's exactly where I ended up later that summer with my mother. But before I take you on the African adventure, we have to go to Florida, because that's where we went every spring, to the white sand beaches of Far Horizons on Gulf of Mexico Drive. And I loved having banana pancakes for breakfast with my dad, sitting at the dappled glass tables by the side of the pool. And I loved when he took us to the Buccaneer. It was this tacky restaurant where you walked across the bridge and there was a pirate who greeted you at the door, and you reached into the treasure chest and you got the toy and you got the little plastic sword with your soda. And I really loved playing backgammon with him in the afternoons on this set with green and white pieces that felt cool to the touch, and they looked kind of like marble. And he taught me that backgammon was more than just a game of chance. But this year in Florida, everything was different. The first night, my mom and I went to dinner in the dining room, and the smiling maitre d' Jesus came up to the table, and he leaned in, and I could smell his cologne, and I see the brown skin of his face set against the starched white collar of his shirt. And he asked, "And where is Mr. Pfeiffer?" And my mother told him, and he cried. Now, my dad was a really big tipper, but I think Jesus was truly moved by his passing. The next day, I was walking along the beach, and I ran into the owner of the resort, Mr. Khan. He was a fat man who looked like Alfred Hitchcock, and he was walking his little dog along the beach. And he asked me about my father, and I told him. And I remember he bent down, this was Girth, and he scooped up this little dog and held it to his chest, and he said, "Oh dear young man, I'm so sorry." And the next day I saw a boy on the beach, and he was drawing something in the sand, and I went up and I asked, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm practicing my signature. Has your dad taught you your signature yet?" And I said, No. And I didn't have the heart to tell him, because there were some days when I just couldn't make it real. I have one other memory of Florida, and this brings you back to the fear part of the story. And it's of my mother going out to dinner and leaving me with a sitter in the little cottage that we stayed in. And I remember just being terrified that she would not come back, that something would happen to her, there'd be an accident, she'd be killed, and that this fragile little one-parent tent that I lived in now would be knocked down and trampled, and I would be exposed, orphaned, alone, left out in the elements. And the only word I can use to describe this fear is smothicating. And the origin of smothicating, it comes from Florida, because the year before, some friends of mine and I had taken this little kid, and the couch in the cottage, it had a fold-up seat, and they kept the blankets and the pillows in there, and we put this kid in there, and we closed it, and we stuffed him down in there, and he started shouting, "Help! Help! I'm smothicating! I'm smothicating!" But that's what I felt that entire evening, really, until my mother came back safely. So we never went back to Far Horizons, but we did go to Africa later that summer. She took me on a wonderful safari. And I remember landing in Nairobi and seeing this big airport and taking a taxi through this bustling city to the Hilton. And I was thinking, taxi? Hilton? Where's the jungle? And then we took a bus. This was an organized tour. We took a bus up to the rolling hills of Lake Naivasha, as it had been advertised in the tour, and we went out on a boat into the lake to see the cormorants and the flamingos on these weird sort of dead trees that were coming up out of the water. And I put my sweatshirt on because it was cold out, and that my mother had insisted on packing for me. And I remember thinking, cold? We're like 2 inches from the equator. And after Lake Naivasha, we went to Treetops, where Queen Victoria used to come to see the animals, and you climbed up the ladder to go into the little hotel. It was really literally nestled in the trees, and they had this weird dining room because the place was so small. It was just 2 benches along the wall and a table in the middle, and there's no room for waitstaff to come around. So they had this ingenious horizontal lazy Susan thing that went back and forth and passed food along from one end of the table to the other. That's how you ate. Then after Treetops, we went down into Ngorongoro Crater. And there's a winding road that goes down, and the tour guide, Hamitsi, was this old guy with grizzled hair, and he taught me how to sing African national anthem in Swahili, and he had these bloodshot eyes that could spot animals like 5 miles away. So he's driving the VW bus down the winding road in the Ngorongoro crater, and then suddenly we have to stop because there's a bull elephant standing right in the middle of the road. And in a contest between the VW bus and the elephant wins. So we had to back up, and the elephant came forward, and we backed up, and the elephant came forward, and finally he got around us, and we got down to the bottom. And after that, we went to a place called Kikarok Lodge. And Kikarok had been closed for 3 years and just reopened because an elephant, another elephant, it was the same elephant, I don't know, had stepped on the water pipe that connected Kikarok to wherever the water came from, 300 miles away. And it took them 3 years to get the parts and actually fix it. So the lodge had just reopened, and it was this kind of long, low building with a wooden roof and lots of glass, and right out in the middle of the Serengeti Plain. And everything smelled new. I mean, it smelled like varnish. You touched the walls. The walls were sticky because the place had just been redone. And that night, in the dining room, my mom and I were having dinner, and all the other guests are finishing up, and they're filing off to go to their rooms. And this guard comes over to the table, and he's got a flashlight on one side of his belt, and he's got a pistol on the other. And he looks at my mom, and he says, "Are you ready?" She says, "Yeah, ready." And he takes us out the door and across the stretch of Serengeti Plain to a row of tents, about a few hundred yards from the lodge. And I looked at my mom. I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah." So we go into our tent, and the tent, it wasn't just staked in the ground. It was a pretty nice green canvas tent set on a wood platform. And the first thing I notice is there's a monkey in my backpack. The monkeys with the little red butts on the back. So the monkey had gotten into the granola that I had packed, and he was eating it. And I had to shoo him away. And so then we zipped ourselves into the tent, and pulled the mosquito netting around the beds, and we took our malaria pills, and we drank the quinine water, and all the precautions that you take in a safari. And for the next part of the story, we rely on my mother's memory because I was asleep through the whole thing. And as she describes it, there was a sound. And the sound was something like this. Slumping around the tent. And it went on and circled, got closer and closer. And finally, it stopped for a second. And she was terrified. She was terrified that I would wake up and that whatever this animal was would charge the tent and knock it down, and then she and I would be finished like my dad was. But what happened was it slumped around the tent a little bit more, and then she heard another noise. And the noise was like this. And the wall of the tent came in a little bit. And the water buffalo had urinated on the tent, marked its territory, signed its name in the mud, as its father had probably taught it to do, and then it slumped off. And I heard this story from my mom in the morning, and despite the fact that she was smothercating with fear while the animal was slumping around, afraid that I would wake up, it turned out that my mom and I were okay. And I'm not really in a position now to take my own kids to Africa, and I haven't taken them to Florida yet either. But when I go home tonight and I get them from the sitter, and I hope they're not afraid that I'm not going to come back, I'm only about 2 minutes away here. I know that I am going to do one thing tonight. I'm going to teach them how to sign their names. Thank you.